the Boston Marathon bombing. The business's security cameras basically followed that subject all along the way to where he set the backpack down. And so we just learned anytime you have any case like this, look for where the videos might be, or look for the people that might have had phones that videoed this. There's a wealth of information out there if you look for it.
Not all investigators are created equally, and today we're fortunate to be talking to one of the best. We're talking to Doug Kouns. Doug spent over 20 years with the FBI. He did criminal investigations. He also did counterterrorism investigations. When he retired, he built a company called Veracity. And Veracity is full of other FBI agents or law enforcement people that are now in private investigation business. I'm attorney Dave Craig, managing partner and one of the founders of the law firm of Craig, Kelley Faultless. I've represented people who have been seriously injured or who have had a family member killed in a semi or other big truck wreck for over 30 years. Following the wreck, their lives are chaos. Often they don't even know enough about the process to ask the right questions. It is my goal to empower you by providing you with the information you need to protect yourself and your family. In each and every episode, I will interview top experts and professionals that are involved in truck wreck cases. This is After the Crash. Well, thanks, Doug. I appreciate you for being on our podcast. This is Doug Kouns from Veracity, and welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I'd like to start off. I mean, one of my goals in doing these podcasts is to arm ordinary people with information that will empower them so that they know what questions to ask their lawyers, if they're hiring a lawyer, if they've been involved in an injury case. And typically what used to happen was somebody would be in an injury case and they would hire a lawyer, and then they would just defer everything to the lawyer, and they would have no idea what the lawyer was doing. They didn't know if the lawyer was doing a good job or a bad job. And I want to pull back the curtain and show people what we do so that they can ask intelligent questions of their attorneys so that they can make sure that their case value is increased. And one of those areas is investigations.
Right.
And so that's what I wanted to speak with you about. But before we get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about your personal background?
All right. Well, I'm from here in Indiana, a little town near Muncie, and grew up. I went to Purdue at first and transferred and graduated from Ball State. I was a high school chemistry teacher for a couple of years, and then I had an opportunity to become an FBI agent. And so I sat for the exam and passed that. And then there's a phase 2 exam and an interview, and passed that apparently. And took about a year, the whole process of applying, and was off to the academy in Quantico, Virginia, and was an FBI agent for a little over 22 years. And my first office was Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And that was an interesting experience. And got my office of preference transfer back home in the early 2000s. I worked in the Bloomington office for 4 or 5 years, and then took an assignment at headquarters using my chemistry background in the Weapons of Mass Destruction Chemical Countermeasures Unit. And then I got back to Indianapolis as a supervisor of the Field Intelligence Group, which is a group solely dedicated to collecting intelligence on the Bureau's high priority programs. Counterintelligence, counterterrorism, and public corruption are the big 3. Got to retirement age, and we're eligible to retire at 50 in the Bureau as long as we have at least 20 years in. So I hit the eligibility requirements and did the math, and had been thinking about starting my own investigative firm, and that's what I did.
Well, and I think that it's fascinating because, I can tell you, that not all private investigators are equal. I mean, you have all different levels of training. And you don't, people can put out a shingle and say, or on their website and say, I'm a private investigator. But not all private investigators have certainly not as much training as you have, right?
It would be difficult to do so. I would say I've had so many in-service trainings and just the FBI Academy, and the experience is invaluable. They can only teach you so much. It's not till you get out there doing it that you learn the little tricks and what works for you. What works for somebody else may not work for me with my personality. I'm not a desk thumping, tell me the truth right now kind of NYPD blue cop. I'm more of a finesse and using more cerebral techniques to get people to come around to seeing that telling me the truth is the best option.
Well, and I think that, obviously to do the type of investigations you were doing for the FBI, those are major investigations. You're working on the top projects that the government has. And so obviously you have to learn a skill set to do that. You have to be able to kind of put the puzzles together. You got to find the evidence, put the evidence together, figure out where it leads. You have to be able to interview or interrogate folks. You have to, I assume, have some mastery of digital and know where to look and how to look, and have the people who know what to do and how to pull that information together. And so I would assume you have to do all those type of things, wouldn't you, as far as an FBI agent?
Right. You need to be able to do a little bit of everything and be really good at a few things. Talking to people is probably the biggest skill. And, if it's a subject interview, I don't do those anymore. Well, occasionally in the private world, but in the bureau, sometimes you've got somebody that you're talking to that you want to tell the truth, and you may or may not have any evidence to support what you think happened. So your confession is the only thing that you might have. So it's of utmost importance to not screw that up. You got to read their body language, the way, not what they say, but how they say it, just little changes of inflection, little nonverbals, involuntary reactions. Somebody was doing a pretty good job lying to me one time. Then all of a sudden their lip starts quivering. It's nothing they can control, but I picked up on it and I'm like, something's bothering this guy. And you dig in your heels and you basically just go circle it back around, and you ask the same questions in a different way till you find that little discrepancy. And then you exploit that. You kind of paint them into a corner and give them a pathway out, which is the truth. And often they'll even thank you for lifting that weight up off their chest, and they're glad to kind of be on the path of putting it behind them and resolving whatever the issue was.
Well, and I'm sure as a supervisor at the FBI, you had to, on occasion, put a team together.
Oh, yeah.
Of key people. And that's not unlike what I do as an attorney. When I get involved or hired in a big case or a wrongful death or a semi case, the first thing I do is put a team together. And that team will have reconstructionists, mechanics, private investigators, and a variety of different people. So, and I'm impressed with the team that you've put together there at Veracity.
Well, thank you.
It's a heck of a team. Tell us a little bit about your team.
So when I retired, and you've met my partner, Kathy. Kathy and I have about the same amount of time in the bureau. We reached retirement age about the same time. I floated this idea, and she was interested, and I knew what kind of quality work from working with her. She was on one of my teams. Not my last position with the Bureau, but the one before that. She was on my special operations team. We did a lot of surveillance together and became good friends through that, spending just an awful lot of time out on the road, sitting in cars, drinking coffee, waiting for the bad guy to do something. So you get to know people real well in those kind of situations. And she was willing to come along with me, and we got our PI license and started doing business, and it grew. It grew quicker than I expected. And so we suddenly were needing help. And so I looked mainly for retired FBI agents that I had worked with, that I knew something about, that I knew had the work ethic and the quality of work that we were looking for with this firm. What we're trying to do here is set ourselves a little bit apart with the professionalism and thoroughness, and everything we do, we model after how we used to do it with the Bureau. So the reports that you read, those look very similar to the reports that we would turn into the Bureau, and we proofread them. You're very rarely going to find typos or cut and paste errors. Now we do make them, but I think very rarely will you find big mistakes in our work. and we look under every rock and in every corner, under every couch, and looking for those angles. So we got overwhelmed. I hired Paul, I think was our next hire, and he was an FBI agent that I'd worked with in the past. And then Lori does most of our financial fraud cases. She's a certified fraud examiner and also a CPA. So we give her, I'm also a certified fraud examiner, and Paul is also a CPA. But Lori, that's really her thing. She worked on the Bernie Madoff case when she was an active agent. So Lori, I think we're up to 7 or 8 former FBI agents. We've got a retired postal inspector who I think you also had met. I think you sent him our way. Thanks for that. He's been a great investigator. And we've got Jeff from the IMPD. He's a very highly decorated detective. And then we've got an international investigator, Jeremy, who came from the United Kingdom's National Crime Agency. Now, he came to us as a referral from the head of Eli Lilly Security, who was a former FBI agent, and he was high up in the management. He was an SAC, which is the head of a field office. So that's where we came up with this all-star team that I've also got. We just added Tim Green, who was the chief of police of Carmel for many years, and he's been fantastic. And we're even getting ready to start an office in Lafayette. We've got a retired agent that was inquiring if we had any work from him. We occasionally have a case up there, but I really haven't tried to develop the market. So we're looking forward to working more up there.
Well, I think that's fantastic. I mean, I think, I think ordinary folks that are trying to figure out, there's my lawyer hiring the right investigators. There's the question, they wouldn't even know where to start. And certainly one of the starting places is the qualifications of the people. And your whole team is extraordinarily well qualified, and they have years of experience. I mean, both you and your partner have over 20 years in the FBI, and you know how to interview. You guys have worked on the highest profile cases, and so you know how to put the puzzle together to figure out what happened in a case. And so I think so qualifications is number one thing I would look at. What else do you think makes a good investigator?
In my opinion, it's being able to look at whatever the problem is from different perspectives other than your own. Okay, so when you take a case, when we get one from you, I look at it and it's just human nature to quickly decide, okay, well, here's what I think happened. But you don't know that that's what really happened. So you got to keep an open mind, and you've got to go talk to people without these preconceived conclusions, and let them talk, and don't tell them what their answers are or what they should be. Let them tell you what their answers are. And sometimes they don't remember. Sometimes these cases come to us years later, and they do remember them. They just don't think they can. We're skilled at bringing that out by taking them, kind of recreating that scene in their mind. And you can just see them when you finally hit that play button and they're remembering, oh yeah, the car on the right lane came over, and they just seem very pleased with themselves that they've been able to come up with that. So I think really there's not a one size fit all, but being a great interviewer is, I think, the most important thing. You have to build in a short period of time, build enough rapport that person is going to talk to you. If they're a reluctant witness, you have to look for signs of deception and pick that up and overcome those hurdles as they arise. You have to be tenacious too. You can't give up. Sometimes you get a hard to find witness, or they're dodging you, and you can't just make a couple of phone calls and say, hey, we couldn't find them. You got to go knock on their doors at different hours. If they work during the day, you just got to go out at night and knock on their door at 8, 9 o'clock. They might not be real happy with you at first, but once you get to talking to them, you overcome that hurdle, and then you can get to the heart of what you're there for. And usually it ends up a positive experience. We get what we're looking for. So I think really the people skills are as big as anything. We all have experience. We all have training. And so what sets my people apart is just that they're all very good with people, and they know how to approach them and get what they need.
And I think that, and what you're talking about a lot of is in person. It's hard to read somebody if you're just talking to them on the telephone. You don't see that lip quiver, and so I think in this day and age of technology, there are a lot of agents out there, a lot of private investigators at least, who try to do everything from their desk and their computers and their phones. And they've gotten out of the habit of going out and actually doing the legwork and getting out to see the people and face the people and look for other possible witnesses and those type of things. And so, I mean, how important do you think it is on a big case? And I work on multi-million-dollar cases often. And so I don't want somebody on a computer screen. I mean, how important is it to do it face-to-face?
The face-to-face stuff is very important. You just don't build that rapport with a phone call. And first of all, they don't even necessarily believe you are who you say you are. So that's an additional hurdle to overcome. And it's easy to just not answer the phone. People look, I don't know that number. They don't answer it. You leave a message, they may or may not return it. Most people these days don't return messages if they don't know you. And oddly enough, I've had more success with texts, especially with young people. They prefer to text, but there's no rapport building with that. It's just usually mistyped words with, your thumbs. But when you show up in person, it's hard to ignore you. You're right there, and they're going to have to talk to you, and you can overcome those hurdles a lot more easily when you're in person. I can, a lot of times people are interested in that we were FBI agents. And so, oh, you were an FBI. Sometimes they don't like that either. So it's a double-edged sword, but usually they're interested and it gets their attention, and you bring up something, just non-work related, just like, oh, I like your whatever. And again, just a little icebreaker where I've seen some investigators just go, hi, I'm so-and-so. I'm here to talk to you about the crash. What did you see? It's just not the way to go about it. And you just got to put a little time and effort into it and enjoy it. We enjoy what we do. I think that's part of what makes us good at it.
Well, and I think that's, that separates everybody. I mean, I find that attorneys who love what they're doing do a far better job at it than those who are just doing it to make money or for a living. And that's true with you guys as well. I think that, we call you guys and we've given you all kinds of different cases to work on. But when we get if we get a semi case or a big case or an automobile or wrongful death or a brain injury or something significant, we call you guys, and then that's kind of sets in motion a whole bunch of things. And I'd kind of like to walk through for our audience a little bit about what type of things might be involved in a serious wreck. What type of things would a private investigator do for a law firm?
Okay. So we'll get usually an email from one of the paralegals that says what's going on, and sometimes a phone call if it needs a little bit more explanation or certain angles that you're looking to find out about that may not be apparent. But it takes a first review and figuring out what in general happened. Who are my witnesses? Who's the subject? Who's the victim? I'll immediately send a note to our social media, our open source internet person that gets on and looks for all these witnesses, because people tend to take pictures with their phones these days, and they tend to put them on social media and they tend to talk about them. And it was one of your cases that we worked where there were probably half a dozen witnesses that we didn't know about until we dug in, because we found the accident had been reported in the news and it was on their Facebook page. And so would say, I was walking down the sidewalk when that happened. I saw the car pull right in front of her. And so, that wasn't in the police report. And so there was a good interview that, we tracked her down and got a good interview. So we're going to exploit social media, any open source internet. If the defendants, if there's any allegation of drugs or alcohol, we're going to do a background investigation, see if they've got a history of that kind of thing. If it's, say, a dog bite case, we might run them and see, they've got 12 previous dog bite cases. That gives you an idea that maybe this is something other than what they're purporting it to be. They may have a relationship with the neighbor down the road that lets their dog bite them or something. So we prevent people from walking into things that are just going to be money pits that they aren't going to win. Sometimes the answers aren't what you want to hear, but it's what it is, and it helps you make better decisions. We're going to go out to the scene. We're going to take pictures. We're going to look for obstructions for view. If it's an intersection and you can't see around the big sign, that's something that you might want to look at. There's rules about where signs can be placed, and every once in a while they don't conform. We're going to look for businesses nearby that might have surveillance video that captured it. That often happens when there's a gas station nearby. A lot of people have Ring doorbells these days. We'll canvass the neighborhood and say, first of all, did you see, did you hear, and do you have a Ring doorbell that might have captured this? And every once in a while, we'll get that. To get it all organized, we'll go out and start doing interviews. Sometimes those interviews lead to more witnesses and evidence that we didn't know about, and basically just do a thorough investigation where we feel like we're comfortable that we've uncovered every stone without going overboard. Your neighborhood canvas you could take out for blocks, but that would be a waste of time. You try to get a few houses on either side of it, and make sure you have a clear picture of what happened, who saw what, and allow you to practice law and let us do the rest of it.
Well, I think, and one of the things you mentioned was security cameras and the doorbell cameras. 30 years ago or over 30 years ago when I started practicing, you just didn't have that. Now I'm seeing that all over the place. There's security cameras on, pole barns out in the middle of nowhere. They're on, on buildings, on houses, on, they got cameras in cars. They got cameras in semis. There's just so much more, cameras and security videos that are available. Are you seeing a lot of that as well?
Oh, absolutely. And that's something we picked up in the Bureau, and that evolved with my career. Back in the mid 90s when I started doing this, nobody had cameras, and very few people had, the cell phones might have had a rudimentary camera on it. They're nothing like we have today. I don't know if you saw the movie Patriot Day about the Boston Marathon bombing.
Yeah.
The business's security cameras basically followed that subject all along the way to where he set the backpack down. And so we just learned, anytime you have any case like this, look for where the videos might be, or look for the people that might have had phones that videoed this. There's a wealth of information out there if you look for it.
And would you agree that, that some of that data can be lost if you don't move quick enough?
Oh, yeah.
So one of the great things about you guys are prompt. We hire you and you guys are immediately on top of a case. But it's important for the people who are looking to hire a lawyer or hire an investigator to know that there's some of that stuff is taped over or lost if you don't move quick enough.
Well, cloud storage is expensive. It adds up. So it just depends on the business. We did one for you, and I think we were 2 days too late. It had expired, or not expired, just that gas station's retention policy was 1 year period, and then it started overwriting. And I think we were there a year and 2 days later, so it just didn't exist. And I think a year is a long time. I think most businesses only save their video for like a month, if that. And sometimes they want some sort of legal service. Sometimes they just want letterhead requesting it. It just depends. But you're right, if you don't get on that quickly, it could be gone forever.
And I think that one of the mistakes that some lawyers make and investigators make and is not getting out to the scene. You just talked about it. Not only are you looking for the security cameras or the obstructions, like you mentioned, but without going to the scene, how in the world can how do you do a deposition down the road? How do you know what you've got? How do you know either good or bad? Like you said, as a lawyer, I just want the facts. I mean, I don't care. I just want to know what they are. I don't want to be surprised years down the road.
Oh yeah.
I want to know on the front end.
Right. I was just thinking about a case with a bus. I think it was you guys where we found a closed page on Facebook where several people were talking about that and how that bus had passed them going 75 miles an hour in a 55 mile per hour zone earlier before. So they didn't see the accident, but they saw factors leading up to it. And we'll usually even call the investigating officer that's on that police report because they're in a hurry. They want to get the scene cleared. Often there's more to it than what they might have put in their report. And you can get that out of them from just doing a good interview of them as well. Yeah. But yes, being efficient, we don't sit on stuff. When we get a new case, it gets assigned, we start working on it. And, I think we get most of them done within a month, easily, a few weeks sometimes.
The problem is evidence can disappear. Videos, film can be canceled. I mean, obviously some people hire us quick. Some people don't hire us for a year. We have no control over when people get hired, but once you are hired, at least in my opinion, it's imperative that you get rolling as quickly as possible. Roadways can be repaved or redone. So you have a whole bunch of different things that could happen where your case can be ruined by just simply not getting out to the scene.
Mm-hmm. Like we learned from you guys, we learned stuff all the time. And on the back of street signs, there's usually a date for when that sign was put there. And sometimes it wasn't there when the accident happened. And you wouldn't have known that if you didn't visit the scene.
I remember trying a case down in, I think it was Ripley County, Indiana. And I couldn't figure out because the defendant was just I took his deposition and he appeared to be a good person. He was a veteran. He appeared to be telling the truth, but he swore that he didn't see my client stopped at a stop sign. And when you're on the roadway, it's like, okay, well, there doesn't appear to be any obstructions. And so, I sent my investigators out and at that time, this was years ago. But then I went to the scene and because the investigators came back and said, look, there's no obstructions. I'm like, well, that makes sense because either I'm really a bad judge of character and this guy's lying, or he's telling the truth and there's just something we're missing. And I went back to the scene and on a couple of different occasions, because sometimes things change. As you know, you go at day versus go at night, you go at different times, you try to go back on the time of the wreck. And what I found was that there was a neighborhood and there was a semi that sometimes the person who lived in this house, they would park their semi in a particular location that actually would have blocked the view as the defendant would have come around a curve. And so all of a sudden it made sense. Now he didn't remember the semi. He just said, I didn't see her. And luckily for me, the defense lawyer never went to the scene. Never went to the scene.
Yeah.
And so we were able to win that case. But other times I've been at the scene when the defense lawyer pulls up in his car and we're both there looking at it and both of our private investigators. So it is important, I think, for investigators like yourself to get out, and the lawyers, I think, to actually get out of their office, and get out on the streets.
We did one for you guys just a few months ago, where I had to do a little math because it was the same. We went at the same time of day that the accident occurred, which was kind of like twilight, but it was a different month. So we had to figure out where the sun would have been in relationship to the day that we went to take pictures on. So the equivalent of 7 p.m. on the day of this accident, it would be basically the sunlight equivalent of 8:30 p.m. And so we went and took pictures, and there's a big difference in that twilight. And also another, to your point, the season matters in sometimes trees hang down and obscure a stop sign. And if it's in the winter, it doesn't obscure it. But if it's in the summer and the leaves are in, it will. Or a mowing crew's been by recently. There's so many factors. You got to go to the scene. There's no way around it. I think people maybe get I don't know if it's lazy, but just complacent. They think they can do it. They think they can do an adequate job, and maybe they can, but not always.
And I think sometimes the lawyers don't want to invest the money. I see that where there's some law firms who want to skimp on the front end in hopes that the case will settle down the road. The problem is if you don't do that investigation in the beginning, it's hard to put it back together a year later, 2 years later, 3 years later, when the case is getting ready to go to trial, and all of a sudden you find out that the insurance company is not willing to pay you a fair settlement. Now what are you going to do? Whereas I think, at least my experience, is the good trial lawyers are putting their case together as if they're going to go to trial in every case.
Right. I think that's true. I think the quicker you get on this, the better people's memories start to fade. Witnesses move, and then they become hard to find. Within weeks or months, I think is the best time to strike on these, to interview people when the memory's fresh. I mean, we can bring a lot back, but it's still better when it's fresh, and people haven't moved. Half the battle sometimes is finding these guys. They're sometimes a little bit transient, or they job hop a lot, and we end up finding them in another state somewhere, and you can't do that in-person interview yourself. I can get out my retired FBI agent book and ask them to go do the interview for me, but it's not quite as good as when you are right there with them and you have all that tacit knowledge about the investigation.
And that's one of the things your company has the ability to do as well, is find witnesses. I mean, sometimes key witnesses will disappear on you, especially you may even have a good statement from them. But all of a sudden now it takes you a couple of years to get to trial, and those witnesses disappear. Your company's able to find them too, right?
Right. You got to think out of the box on these. So sometimes you can't find the person, but the technology that we have, the databases that we subscribe to, if I can't find you, I'll find somebody that knows you, and they'll probably know where you are. So I think Sunday, for one of your paralegals, they couldn't find a witness that we already had a statement from and needed to get a hold of them. And even this is on the defense side, the defense's counsel said they couldn't find their own client. So I had him on the phone about 24 hours later because I couldn't find him, but I found his older sister and had a nice conversation, and she was agreeable to helping me, and she made a couple of phone calls and found out he was living with his sister in Florida, and called down to her sister, and they put him on the phone. And you just got to dig your heels in and look.
I think it's always amazing that on the insurance companies can't find their defendants. Usually they're really bad. It's awful convenient that they can't find them. So I know another type of case that we've worked with you on, which are always fascinating, is sometimes there's a wreck and you have to look for other culpable parties, other folks that might be responsible. And so sometimes it's the intersection. So sometimes there's a wreck and the intersection, and those are always kind of tricky because there may be a history there of other wrecks or whatever, and so kind of walk us through, like, what you've done those for us. What kind of stuff do you do on those cases?
So that was our first case with you guys, was a dangerous intersection case, and basically going through the process like I described before, looking at their police reports and everything that's been done previously, and then looking at that intersection from, we've got, you can use Google Maps or a satellite view, and we also have a drone. You can get up and take a look at it from above. And the one I'm thinking of now, it was in such a way that the road curved off one way, and at night, because it was poorly lit, it looked like the road coming this way was a continuation of the road that you were on before it curved off. And so the one party thought she was just going to continue straight on, and it was, she was supposed to have curved, and it ended up being a head-on collision, unfortunately. So we got out and started doing the neighborhood canvas, just knocking on the doors. And I think the second interview I did on that one, the man was talking about, oh, that's always been a dangerous intersection. We had a neighborhood group that formed about this intersection because of the traffic that picked up when they put the church in right next door. And we took it to the county commissioner's office, and I was like, okay, that's a big element in a case like that, is they have to have foreknowledge of the fact that that's a dangerous intersection. Like, you can't have an accident and then nobody's ever brought it to anyone's attention that it was dangerous. They had clearly been advised that there was a problem and had clearly done nothing about it.
Well, I think that's, and then kind of bring everything to a conclusion. If people are out there and they're trying to figure out, how do I pick a good investigator? How do I know? What should I do if I'm and a young lawyer, maybe a lawyer who's trying to figure out, who do I hire? What's your advice to them?
I would call and interview that investigator and see how they deal with you. Are they nervous talking to you? I mean, everybody's usually a little nervous. They want your business and don't want to screw it up. But what are their qualifications? What's their experience? What other training have they been to? Is it someone, I don't want to be disrespectful to anybody, but is it somebody that was just a cop for a couple of years, decided they didn't like it, and now they got their private investigator? Well, that person doesn't have a whole lot of training or experience. So if you don't do a little due diligence of your own, you can end up spending a lot of money and not getting the results that you need. I think our hourly rate's probably a little bit more than our competition, but I would argue that we're more efficient and more effective. And the old adage, you get what you pay for.
I couldn't agree more. One last question. I couldn't go without asking. So how does it feel to be a celebrity? I keep seeing you on television. So you're getting interviewed a lot on television, on news.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the lady that we used, Meg and Associates, for our marketing when we first started up, gave us a connection with Fox News, and we've kind of become their go-to source for law enforcement expert on whatever the topic of the day is. So that's been a real good win-win relationship. They get a news article and we get a little publicity, so we love that too.
I love seeing you. I always say, hey, I'll tell my wife, I say, hey, look, here's Doug. That's who we use. That's the best private investigator I've ever worked with. So,
well, thank you for that.
Well, Doug, thank you very much for coming on our podcast, and hopefully people have learned a little bit about how to use and how to pick a private investigator.
Well, thank you for having me, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon.
This is David Craig, and you've been listening to After the Crash. If you'd like more information about me or my law firm, please go to our website, ckflaw.com. Or if you'd like to talk to me, you can call 1-800-ASK-DAVID. If you would like a guide on what to do after a truck wreck, then pick up my book, Semi-Truck Wreck, a guide for victims and their families. This is available on Amazon, or you can download it for free on our website, ckflaw.com.